So, patch 1.1.1 for Sorcerers is...
Fireball, 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 fireball. Okay. Yeah, alright, this is kind of good now.
Hello, my fellow Sorcerers. Welcome to our saving grace, our massive list of buffs, our glorious patch that's going to take us from the worst class in the game to, please God, anything but that. At least that's the goal. Whether that's been achieved, I have mixed feelings on so far, but at the very minimum, offensively, yeah, alright, fair enough, I admit it. I have been having a blast, well, blasting with Fireball. I am very excited to share with you a few select builds that we can now actually make happen in a really effective, fun, and exciting way. I've chosen Fireball first, obviously, but you may be sat there going, okay, yes, I know Fireball got a lot of buff, it's got a bigger radius, the crit's gone up, the unique tied to it, the bouncing is better, and everything seems like a promising shift, but is it really going to compete with Ice Shards or Arclash or Blizzard Ice Spikes? Well, let me tell you just one sentence. What do you get when you combine Barber that stacks and multiplies damage after critting for 4 seconds and 120% on a max roll increased critical damage to healthy targets? Targets that remain healthy for 4 seconds because Barber means that they don't lose health for 4 seconds. Well, you get untold millions of one-shot cataclysmic fiery death. And it's marvelous. And it really doesn't hurt that we could actually use Gloves of the Illuminator now, because coupled with the increased radius on our Fireball just permanently having, well, we get some seriously effective bounces. Look how close to you the first bounce is. That is such a difference, and look how much overlap there is between each bounce's radius. You only need to hit people twice with a bounce before it does way more damage than just regular Fireball, and because of both the size increase and the bounce length reduction, you're going to hit them 3, maybe 4 times, and it's really good. So ultimately what we have is a build that with just one cast of your core skill can hit the same enemy multiple times, stacking and amping up Barber explosions to then one-shot everyone else on and on, chaining down the screen as it just keeps bouncing. That lets you be really damn tanky, or at least as tanky as Sorcerer can get. We still feel a bit squishy even with the defensive buffs, but you know, who's shocked at that? And you have finally plenty of mana to do so, even though you're playing with fire. Literally. The one caveat is you may hear that and go, what? I'm seeing you run out of mana a bit while I'm watching you, blow everything up. And yes, that is true. The reason is, and don't get me started on how much of an awful decision that this is, but for some reason, Blizzard felt that only uniques that you get after the patch would have the changes and the buffs on them affix-wise. So mine still have chance to stun. If you get one now, it will have chance to restore resource. That will make it so you never run out of mana, because Fireball has a really high lucky hit chance. We play with really high lucky hit in this build, and every bounce is a chance to do lucky hit. So when these get chance to restore resources, when I find a new pair, or you find yours, it will solve all of the mana problems like that. Though that said, I'm not actually having what I would describe as mana problems, just an awkward sometimes bit of downtime, but my clear speed, especially against stuff that isn't pushing, is still ridiculous, because essentially one bouncing Fireball just kills an entire pack of enemies. You don't need a second one. It's overkill unless you're going maybe 15 above levels than you, in which case, yeah, you will need the new copy of these for the extra mana, because you will need to cast way more Fireballs, but that's to be expected. In any case, let's get down into the build and how this is all set up in in patch 1.1.1, the savior of arguably the best, most classic of magical spells. Skill tree will get us started then, as it always so reliably does. 2 ranks in your firebolt, as somewhat ironically for a fireball build, we do need this as our first enchantment slot for burning synergy, because fireball itself doesn't set enemies on fire, but we want as much crit damage pumped as possible, because this is an ultra crit focused build. So yes, getting everything on fire for Devouring Blaze and the Fire Paragon board is a requirement, though that feels kind of apt when we're using fireball, so I don't begrudge it this once, despite it being perhaps a boring choice. In any case, yes, get all of your points into fireball, and then take it to enhanced for that lovely buffed radius increase, and then destructive for that buffed crit damage. You will be hitting at least 3 enemies a lot, because we will be using the gloves for the bouncing, so this is a huge bump. Our second enchantment slot is the proving to be insanely reliable, both for vulnerability from greater and just extra damage, and being a source of frost damage for Telrash's Frozen Orb in the second enchantment slot. We will be attacking so quickly with Fireball, thanks to Esu's ferocity, the aspect tied to that. We'll get all to that, of course, but know that we will be summoning these things like no tomorrow, and it adds so much to what we're doing in many different ways. Grab a point of devastation just so we can get max elemental dominance, because you will be casting Fireball a lot from above 50 mana, especially if you have the correctly buffed Gloves of the Illuminator. Then we get all of our defensives, as that will apparently never change for Sorcerer, maybe by Season 7. And yes, Flame Shield for shimmering, the emergency button, teleport for that Raiment Stun grouping to then splat your fireballs all over, and the defensive from shimmering. We grab Ice Armor with the bit more mana regen, just to help smooth things out if you get unlucky for too long, and then yes, Frost Nova as our fantastic follow-up vulnerable CC lockdown to a Raiment Teleport. 1 rank in Elemental Attunement, we are critting like crazy, so this will just happen every 10 seconds without more investment needed, and we need as much lucky hit as we can get, so we get as much lucky hit as we can get. Our defensive duo of Mana Shield and Protection to give us, well, protection, and then the trio of fire passives. In flames, we will be healthy most of the time, and crippling flames, as immobilizing them is really nice, both so they aren't hitting you, and so we go to the increased crit chance of Devouring Blaze. Even though it did sadly get nerfed, it's still very much worth taking, especially in such a hyper crit focused build. After that, we get Inferno, primarily for the Supreme, to give a full big 8 seconds of infinite mana. Once you've got Esu's going, the attack speed, the aspect, accelerating, and infinite mana, the amount of fireballs per second is so glorious, and this gorgeous flame snake is what lets that happen. We also get 3 ranks in Fiery Surge, again just to smooth out the mana curve, and then our key passive of choice is Esu's Ferocity for that increased crit damage and chance, and now coming with its buffed state that we can get the double passive and thus the legendary aspect active against bosses just by critting them, and I cannot express enough how much of a difference that makes. So you will be set up like this: Ice Armor for when you need mana and to not die, Flame Shield for when you really need to not die, and then Teleport, Frost Nova, jump away, bounce your fireball through the enemies, and they will die very quickly. But you don't need to do the usual close range, Raiment, Grouping Stun, Frost Nova, and so on, because you've actually got a shocking amount of range. The fireball bouncing will get quite far on your screen, and you'll notice that very conveniently, the travel speed of the bouncing fireball is almost identical to the travel speed of the frozen orb as it fires out from your enchantment. This will result in them both traveling together, the Frozen Orb doing damage, making them vulnerable, and along with the Fireball stacking up that Barber detonation, and you'll find yourself with a bit of a lucky streak, just sort of auto-passively detonating entire rooms as you go through dungeons, and that's really satisfying. And actually, you might look at the Fireball bounce and go, it's actually quite a slow travel time compared to just like Ice Shards or the raw speed of Arclash, but what you can do is fire like 2 bounces, teleport ahead and Frost Nova, and then the bounces will arrive after you and start doing damage to the now vulnerable frozen enemies, so you can kind of pre-allow for it. As you can see, you can get ahead and then your fireballs reach you, and that lets you do a few little tricky things if you see a group of elites. You don't need to arrive and then blast, you can blast, then arrive, then keep blasting, and it gets nice and stacked up. So because we do have Esu's Ferocity for our attack speed on the aspect, what we want to be doing is killing someone with a crit, putting down your snake, and then look at the amount of fireballs you can launch. It is ridiculous. This is your boss killer. Get your max attack speed active, drop the snake, and just stand there and get as many fireballs out as you can in the 8-second window, and then the rest of your mana pool afterwards. After all that, it's, you know, kinda self-explanatory. When you're doing open world or Helltide or low-level Nightmare dungeons, you can just do a fireball and then run with it, and it will just kill everything. You don't actually need to do another one. Just do the fireball and move, and it will just sort of passively kill the enemies as you pass by them. So if I do it down here and then just sort of run with it, they just kind of die. If I do it over here and then just sort of run with it, and now they're all sort of really dead. And apart from being amusing, it just makes it a very effective clearing speed build. You just don't need to put that much actual time into rawly casting the fireballs. Because the bounces are so frequent and overlapping now thanks to the buffs, they will just clip everyone so much, and it works again. And I know I keep saying this, but I'm not used to Sorcerer getting meaningfully positive changes, but it just works so well. Let's move on then to our gear, our stats, our aspects and hearts and all of that good stuff. For your gems, you want your crit damage to vulnerable, you want your rubies for that max health, and that's all simple enough. Aspects, we start with this, Ancient Flame. With both your passives from Esu's Ferocity active, which will happen automatically just from critting a boss, or the usual, you know, killing an enemy with a crit, which we'll be doing constantly, you get 50% attack speed. And what's better than fireballs? 50% more fireballs. This is suddenly very good thanks to it no longer being useless against bosses, and the extra mana regen we have from the actual buffed version of Gloves the Illuminator that I don't have yet, thank you Blizzard. Then we want our Frozen Orbit so that our Enchant Frozen Orb actually stays in place where it needs to be and explodes, and it's gone off screen so I can't even show you, thank you very much for that, and you know how that all works. Then we get ourselves Accelerating for even more attack speed. We're always critting with our core Fireball, and again, what's better than 50% more fireballs? Well, 72% more fireballs, or 75 if you've got the max roll. Then you want more vulnerable damage. This also got buffed to be an extra 10%, and given how potent vulnerable is, even in its nerf state, yeah, this is felt. Now, it is at this point that if you are struggling with mana, even with the correct gloves, well, put on something like this for the lucky hit chance to restore mana when you deal fire damage. Now, it's not just fire damage over time, it's just fire damage in general, so this is a massive increase in resource for fire builds, and will sort you right out, but I am pushing the damage because, you know, I can't help myself. Then, yes, on your necklace for that 1.5 times boost, you want the 3 curses. The extra crit damage against healthy, and, well, doubled against healthy, and then just extra in general. I cannot still get over how much this was buffed, and how well it interacts with Barber to a ludicrous degree. Get this at a high roll, get it on your necklace, and don't look back. On your helmet, we want that extra lucky hit chance with a barrier. We'll always have a barrier up. We're playing Sorcerer, and we want as many many chances to get mana back from our gloves, again if they were the correct one, as possible amongst the other many lucky hit benefits. The usual Raiment of the Infinite for that stun group CC, bounce the fireball on them, that's all good, I never need to explain this, it is an incredible unique. And then yes, Gloves of the Illuminator, the now very twice or maybe 3 times buffed unique for fireball, and it really does work now. The extra ranks are obviously great, the attack speed is great, the crit chance is great, and the resource regen, if it's the good one, is also great. And the damage lesson is now really minimal at 35, so you just need 2 bounces, and you can see how easily 2 bounces will hit enemies. That said, if you don't have this unique, you can do this exact same build, but with normal fireball, and put something like Conceited here for more damage with a barrier, and you will have nearly as good of a time. On our legs, we just want some disobedience to not die, and then given how crit focused we are, we want Esu's Heirloom for all of that crit, and getting extra move speed is really nice just for getting through dungeons quicker. This by itself is already giving us nearly 8% crit, and that goes up even more as we get the dash from the, well, dash. So that's your aspects all sorted. Malignant Hearts then, you want this, the Dark Dance. Every 5 seconds you use health instead of mana for the fireball. It's not really for the damage increase, it's just to help with the mana. If you have the mana without it, then you can put Picana in for even more damage, or Revenge to be even more tanky if you're pushing with this build, but I like this, I think it flows just a little bit better. And then you also want your Telrashes for that lovely stacking near permanent damage buff. You will get a stack from the Shadow damage of Barber, you'll get a stack from the lightning damage of Teleport, the fire obviously, and then the ice coming from your frozen orbs, so you're always at 4 stacks, which is a lot of damage. And then yes, Barber, the MVP heart of the whole season, and in a crit build like this, especially with how much crit damage we have against healthy targets, that this makes happen for 4 seconds, I cannot stress that enough. You cannot find a better place for this heart. Get the max duration you can, and then just watch the sparks fly. When it comes to affixes, well, it's the kind of usual bunch for a sorcerer build that uses mana. Your priority is mana cost reduction, resource generation, and max mana. And that will do you well once you reach the critical mass to never run out. After that, you want ranks of Devouring Blaze, ranks of defensive skills. Following that, you want your cooldown reduction, as much of it as you can get. Then you want your crit chance, you want your lucky hit chance, you want your crit damage, you want your vulnerable damage, and then you want your conditionals like close or damage to burning enemies or crowd controlled or int, and so on and so forth. If we have a look at the actual kind of breakpoints here, well, as you see, 40% crit chance is great. This is kind of where you want to end up, and at least over 100% without this actually being active, so imagine how high this ends up being. Vulnerable damage as high as you can get, and then down on the other side of things, you want mana regen over 50%, and you want mana cost reduction at 30%, so I'm a little bit low here, which is a shame, but the mana gen does help make up for it. Your lucky hit chance needs to at least be 30%, the increase with barrier makes up for the little bit lower side that I'm on, and your cooldown reduction also wants to be about 30%. Again, I'm missing one perfect affix for that to happen. So, all that remains is not actually Paragon. It is to answer a question you've probably had this entire build guide. And that question, I will assume, is where's Staff of Endless Rage? Yeah, I am as sad as maybe you are that this isn't here. It might be a fireball-based legendary, and yes, it's very nice to get the triple fireball, but ultimately, it's not better than 2 extra aspects, and the extra attack speed, and the natural lucky hit chance of the wand, and the natural cooldown reduction of the focus. It just cannot compete with that amount of gain. Even if this said every fireball launches 3 instead of 1, that would be a lot closer, but every third, no. It's just a definitive loss on so many levels to put this staff on. The effect is neat, and if it was like a helmet or something, then we could get away with it, and gladly, but as a staff, sadly, it just doesn't do enough. So, with that done then, let's talk our Paragon board, beginning with, well, the beginning board. Follow me up, get to your Elementalist, and then put in your Elementalist in your first glyph slot. Stacking up and a natural ally to Tel Rasher, that extra 15% is nice to keep happening, but the buff to the non-physical damage you're getting from Elemental Balance here is really potent too. Then we go up and get the Burning board for Burning Instinct. We don't need that because we're not about dot damage, but we are about doing damage to burning enemies. So get Smoldering Embers, get your Cinders, get your damage reduction too, and then in this get your Destruction. More crit damage and more stacking damage for critting. This is a big crit build. It is the natural choice. And then head up and get your Kindling Cluster too. Then we want to head left and get the Searing Heat board. This was buffed, and an extra 15% crit chance for your fireballs is nothing to sniff at. Do this orientation, go straight up, grab the Pyromancy Quartet here too for just a bit more damage, and then get the legendary node. Heading straight up from Kindling, back on your Burning Instinct, you want to end up in the vulnerable board that is Frigid Fate. Get the cluster of vulnerable damage over around Oppressive here on the right, then go straight up for the glyph slot and get Tactician to buff the amount of vulnerable damage the weakness node that you'll then get is giving you. Do activate the extra 10% for defensive skills. I don't have the Paragon points to do that yet, but you do want to make it happen. Once you have got those all done, you have got the really strong core for this build. After that, though, you do want to go down from Searing Heat and get the Combustion Cluster for more critical strike damage. And you can also go over here for a little bit of damage reduction too, which is much appreciated. You also want to come and get the Safeguard Cluster for more armor and health, and then we head to this glyph slot and even more fire damage from Flame Touched. In this glyph slot, you ultimately want to get something like Control for when you are frozen with both Frost Nova and your Frozen Orb, and the Stunned from your Raiment. Then we head out and get our next board, which will be your Enchantment Master board. We want the 10% non-physical damage and so on and so forth. The elite damage is really good too, and having a 20% extra chance, so 30 to 36 on summoning a Frozen Orb is really good. And our glyph on that board, Exploit for even more vulnerable damage. So there you have it, everybody. Patch 1.1.1, the savior of Fireball, and I am really impressed with the results. I don't think it is better than Ice Shards, Ice Spikes, or Arc Lash, but I think it's almost as good, and it lets you actually play with the fun bouncing fireball, and that's really, really good. Next time, and very soon in a couple of days, I'll be bringing you the 1.1.1 Chain Lightning, as that was the other big winner, and that one is really looking promising, so stay tuned for that. For now then, like if you enjoyed this, subscribe and hit the bell for more, consider supporting the future of the channel on Patreon down below, and until we meet again, a goodbye.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.